How do you become an inspirational speaker, a transformative leader, make somewhere the place to be? These answers can only be passed down from one generation to the next through stories. Each story is not a step-by-step guide, but rather delivers the principles for success, or the intangibles. Tiger Tales is a Toastmasters club from Rochester, New York that started 7 years ago. Starting with its founders, this club has produced eloquent orators that have gone on to become this generation of leaders all around the world. Join us in talking with our club's cornerstones, revealing the undefined, the intangibles.
Hello friends, welcome back to the Intangibles podcast, where Alex Turner and myself, Xavier Tarr, interview original members of Tiger Tales Toastmasters, a club that's seen so much success generation after generation. In these interviews, our goal has been to distill what has made this club so special, the intangibles qualities. And what we find is it's the people and the stories. Our first interview was with Halim, who was our visionary. Our second interview was with Alex himself. Him and Corey Wilson, who we'll interview at a later time, they bring the soul to Toastmasters. They know through their own journeys how to help someone unlock themselves through their story that has caused life-changing transformations. Today's interview is going to be with Preethi, and what she brings is just this excellent organization that needs to happen in order for a club to be successful. Everyone has to be at the right place at the right time, ready to go, so that whoever comes, whether it's a guest or anybody, can see this organizational value as well as the hearts. Just this mesh of vision, organization, and soul has been critical to the founding of Tiger Tales. So Preethi today is going to share with us her story about how she found out about the club and the kind of speaker she developed into. Through this journey, you'll be able to see how Preethi grew as a speaker, but also as a leader who left an impact on an organization 7 years down the road. I can't wait, so let's dive in. The big first question I have for you, Preethi, is how did you get started in Toastmasters? Do you remember that experience?
Very clearly, actually.
Good.
I've repeated it so many times that it's embedded. Halim and I were talking about our PhD work, just engineering stuff, and he had somehow invited me to one of his other Toastmasters. So I went there one Sunday and I liked it enough to have something like that, but not that particular branch. It was a little bit boring because it was 2 hours. And as a first timer, I was like, it's 2 hours. I don't want to sit there for 2 hours and speak and listen. But then Halim was talking about, he picked me to talk about this because he had heard me in a panel for PhD students. And he thought maybe, I talk a lot, so this topic. So he asked me whether I would want to join him in starting a Toastmasters club at RIT, and I said, sure, yeah. I mean, my main point was I have seen so many talks at RIT, all these students as PhD students, you have to give talks all around the world. And at RIT, I've seen so many students who don't do well in that aspect. You're very good at working, the hard work, writing, all of that, but when it comes to presentation or talking, it's just not that good. Unfortunately, my advisors are very good, so they would guide me, but not a lot of students have that kind of support. That was my motivation factor for joining Halim, and then we just took off from there.
So you didn't really have to twist your arm too much. You saw this intrinsic value of Toastmasters.
Yes, I wasn't aware of the format or how successful that format is. I'd never heard about Toastmasters before he introduced it to me, but I definitely knew something needed to be done for students to, gain up the courage and be able to present in front of an audience, things like that. But the methods, I think, the first meeting I still didn't know when the first meeting happened what was going to happen. And I was the speaker. But once it happened, and then Corey comes up and he's evaluating, I just understood, okay, this is how it works, and it's going to be a good one.
That's definitely one of my favorite memories of the starting of the club was that first demo meeting when you and I were both speaking, and I just remember it really clearly how full that room was. I would love to hear more about kind of what your experience was that day, kind of giving your icebreaker and how that went.
I have always been a very talkative person, so I had to work on my listening. I have to still continue working. Thinking that I was very talkative, or I was very confident in talking to people, extrovert kind of. So I thought, okay, giving a speech, not a big deal. I've done this so many times. But when it came to that official setting of there are going to be 50 people watching you and there's an evaluator who's going to tell everybody how you did, that just takes the toll a little bit. Like, it's not going to be written in a paper, secretly given to you. It's going to be told in front of everybody how you did it. Ali really helped me the first speech, writing it. I think he brought a lot of what he had learned into that already, even before I knew what he was doing. When Corey started evaluating, I thought my speech was like awesome and nobody can find any flaws. How can you find a flaw in that speech? But then Corey comes up, he lists all good stuff as usual. And then it's like, okay, see, Corey agrees with me. And then he stated the two things that I never thought about. It was like making love with the lectern. I was like, I have never thought about what I'm doing with my hands and, where am I standing? You always know, okay, you have to make eye contact with the audience, but who knew, somebody's going to be paying attention to where you stand or how you stand. That's when I figured, it's just awesome that they took even somebody who thinks they're very good. It was a good one. I did find a couple of difficulties in writing it. Remembering stuff, because you don't want to do those ahs and ums, and now you're in this official state. As I went on, I realized, how easy it gets once you start being in that scenario, keep practicing it. And I'm glad he put me as the first speaker for the demo. Well, until Alex came up as the first demo. here's a beginner and here's an expert, and then, wow, okay, that's a very, very wide range of people there. But it was good, and the feedback from the people, like the audience turning up, was itself a very big turn on at that time.
Carry a coffee mug when you go to the coffee shop, or carry a reusable bag when buying groceries, or use less water, or turn the lights off when you're not in use, or carpool, and so on. Adapt one of these and you've already helped so much. Besides, going green is the trend these days. You're so popular in school and college when you tell your friends, I have gone green. Companies look at your resume and they are already impressed when they see how much you've helped save the environment. Your job prospect is higher. And above all, the one change that you made has its own ripple effects. When watching you inspires your friends and your loved ones to change.
It's funny that you say, here's an expert, because I watched my speeches from that time, and there was something that I still didn't get about the way that I presented myself to a room, where it just looks like, this is a podcast, so you can't see, but this swagger, and I'm moving my shoulders, but there's just like this ego that's just like emanating out from me that I'm like, oh gosh, no, get that away.
Like I said, even I thought I'm this person who can talk, an extrovert. I don't any issues with confidence, approaching people, and that makes me a good speaker. And that ego somehow comes in when you're, about to speak in front of an audience. I mean, it's good when you are confident because of that tiny little ego, but it shouldn't become into an ego.
We just keep learning and learning, and so even when we think we're an expert, we get better and better.
Now, one thing you mentioned, Preethi, is your biggest trouble is actually writing the speeches. I was curious if you learned anything, maybe the hard way or through your time writing speeches, that you could give advice for new people trying to think, oh man, what am I going to speak on next?
I think there are two parts here. One is, what is the topic that you're going to speak about? And the other one is, how do I write it? Plain old writing. And that just comes from practice. So just write it. And fortunately, with Toastmasters, as opposed to, other paper writing, you have so many people who you can run this by. Just ask Corey, hey, I've written this speech. Can you just look at it? Or, it's not like you're giving them a PhD of 80 pages thesis, asking them to proofread. In thesis, I had to write it, and of course my advisors had to read it, but that's about it. In this one, it's just a 2-page story that you can ask multiple people to read multiple times, and all the people I've met in Toastmasters are very open to this kind of idea. They don't shy away from it. My biggest problem was, what is the topic? Because especially when you hear Sabur and Khan and all of them, they had stories. They had stories that really touched people. Corey says everybody has stories, and I think they do. It's just I don't know, my story is worth 5 minutes or something. I always wanted to take the humorous approach. Any story that brings in humor would be awesome, which is probably what all my 10 speeches were about. But that was very difficult, actually, because inspirational speech, I can do inspirational speech as well, make people cry, but I don't want to do it. It's not my motivation. So I want to make people laugh. And that was kind of like, what kind of joke or humor should I add, which is generic. It has to be generic so everybody will smile or, say, oh, that I've done that mistake. I've done that, been in that situation. So that's why my speeches were a little difficult for me to think about what I'm going to speak and, the cake burning story or something. It's just one incident and then you have to keep thinking about it. But it was a good challenge, I would say.
I'm not familiar with this cake burning story, and now I want to be. Do you have an abridged version of it?
I think it was one of my best because I didn't have to think too much about coming up with a story. We celebrated birthdays in our lab, so I was baking a cake, and it was first time I was doing it, and somehow I figured that it's turned into a rock. Like, it's just not good. So I was about to throw it away, and then I figured, okay, why don't I taste it a little bit and see if it's really, and maybe I could eat it instead of sharing. So I tasted it. It was awesome. I was like, I shouldn't throw it away. But by that time, I had already started baking another cake, a plain old chocolate cake. So I had 2 cakes, and it was just one of those stories where you keep, you're about to throw it and you picked it up from the trash and you don't want to tell people you picked up the cake from the trash and, all of that. So it was just, add more flour, add more water, and then the whole thing is a mess. So it was that kind of a story. It was humorous when I was in that situation, but then trying to remember that back when it happened, it was part of like, what did happen? Why was it funny?
Yeah, so it's like finding that universal humor, especially for our club, which across the world was represented. You're dealing with different cultures where maybe something's more funny in the US or in India, but it might not transition well to somewhere else.
Absolutely, yeah. I do tend to shy away from humors that are very specifically culture-based. One, I don't know how to pinpoint it. I mean, yes, now I know a little bit about America, so I laugh at a lot of stuff that Americans laugh at, but a lot of Indians don't know it or aren't familiar. So I go the Seinfeld route, that I call it, because his jokes are almost always, very generic. What happens?
Jokes about nothing.
Yeah.
I saw a study that said speaking in front of a crowd is considered the #1 fear of the average person. I found that amazing. Number 2 was death. Death is number 2? This means to the average person, if you have to be at a funeral, you would rather be in the casket than doing the eulogy.
As you asked me, what piece of advice do I have for people? I think it's just finding their reason for giving a speech. Whether you want to do a motivational speech, you want to share a story because it's a sad one and you just want people to listen to you, or you want to make them laugh so they can forget about their sorrows for 5 minutes. It's just finding your piece of reasoning.
I hope you guys all enjoyed. Join us for our next episode, where we're going to dive into what exactly was involved in our 55-minute meetings, all of the little details, and Preethi's going to take us through everything. See you next time.
Do we have some of your recorded speeches from Halim's drives, or?
I'd have to ask.
Oh my goodness, please don't show them.
You have
We will edit them to be as flattering as possible. Xavier's very good at that.
Voice
Trust me.
over or something. Oh my goodness.
you know.
I haven't seen them, but I can imagine how they are. I can imagine.
Yeah.
Those were the days when I would look at the floor or look at the people who were very unfamiliar, and
Fortunately, it doesn't show up as much in the podcast.
Yes.